adjustment here.
Muted.
Okay. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. We got a little adjustment to make. Okay, here we go. Thanks for joining me. We've got a very interesting topic today. This is our Innovation Hour. And, this is one of those topics or calls or programs or presentations that I kind of just squeeze into the Innovation Hour because I really don't know where else to put it. I think we could certainly classify it under innovation, but it is a little bit different of a topic. Now, I wouldn't say I'm an avid reader, but I'm a fairly consistent reader, and that's actually a misnomer because I don't actually read all that much at all, but I do listen a lot. I am a subscriber to Audible, which is an audiobook service. If you are not a subscriber to Audible, I strongly recommend that you take advantage of this fantastic service. It's something like $13 a month. It gives you access to purchase one audiobook per month. It gives you credits for that money, and then you can save them up if you don't want to use them all on a particular month. That's okay. They kind of build up, and then you can use them later. And I listen to audiobooks pretty much anytime I'm driving by myself. If I've got other people in the car, I don't make them listen to it. But if I'm driving by myself, or particularly if I'm exercising, which it actually gives me some motivation to exercise because it's one of the few times where you can actually accomplish two things that are productive at the same time. So that's why I'm a member of Audible. And I didn't really get on this webinar to sell you on the service of Audible. Maybe you want to join that, maybe you don't. But I did purchase an interesting book a few months ago, and I listened to it, and as I was listening to it, I couldn't help but be sucked in by a couple of the parts of it that I felt were very important and interesting to share with you. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about The Power of Habit, and it comes from this book, The Power of Habit by Charles, I guess it's Duhigg, or I don't know how you would pronounce that necessarily, but it's an interesting book, and I want to share a few things with you. And this is one of those calls where, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I'm actually going to read a certain portion of the book. I want to make sure that all of the credit goes to the author, Charles Duhigg. I do not have any interest in trying to pass this off as something that I came up with or anything like that. But I think it's very interesting and worth your time to participate. And then certainly if you'd like to go buy this book and read more about it, you can do that. I think it's an interesting book. The first part of the book talks about personal habits and what are habits, and he goes through something called the habit loop. And it's a fairly interesting read, and I'm not going to get into that particular part of it because I don't think it's all that relevant to what we want to talk about today. I would say it's foundationally relevant, but we can certainly pass by it. You can go pick that part of the book up and read it later if you want to, and it will be worthwhile. But we're going to skip straight to section 2 of his book, or what he calls part 2, which is called The Habits of Successful Organizations. And this is really the part of the book that I was most interested in when I purchased it. The whole concept of habits and personal habits and how to quit smoking or things like that. I get it, it's important. But this organizational part is really why I bought the book, and it sure paid off. And I want to share with you a couple of things that came out of this that might be interesting. And so we're going to start here talking about this guy right here. And if you want to get the book, and if you want to make a note, this is chapter 4. It's part 2, chapter 4, and then section 1 of chapter 4. He breaks the chapters into sections. And we're going to talk about this guy. His name's Paul O'Neill. And no, he's not the baseball player Paul O'Neill, who you may have also heard of. He's actually Paul O'Neill, the former CEO of a company that you've probably heard of before called the Aluminum Company of America. Hang on just one second. There is no good way to sneeze while you're hosting a webinar. Sorry about that. And I want to talk to you about this guy because I think his story is extraordinarily applicable to all businesses. And it's such an unusual story, but it has such a good payoff at the end that I want you to pay attention. So please forgive sort of reading out of a book, but there's too much detail that I don't want to miss if I were to simply summarize. Now, as I'm prone to do, I will stop and make commentary along the way as we go through this. So he starts off by telling the fact that Alcoa had been going through some rough times. It's a very old company. They make everything from cans for Coca-Cola to bolts that hold satellites together and everything in between, the foil that you wrap Hershey's Kisses with. But they were going into some tough times, and the past year preceding Paul O'Neill coming in, they had made a bunch of missteps, tried to expand into product lines, and profits were down. So, and this is where I'll jump into the book. It says there had been a palpable sense of relief when Alcoa's board announced it was time for new leadership. The relief, though, turned to unease when the choice was announced. The new CEO was a former government bureaucrat named Paul O'Neill. Wall Street mainly had never heard of him. When Alcoa scheduled his meet and greet at the Manhattan Ballroom, every major investor asked for an invitation, and this is where we join the story. A few minutes before noon, O'Neill took the stage. He was 51 years old, trim, dressed in gray pinstripes, and in a red power tie. So clearly not the picture I have on the screen right now. Let's make sure. Yeah, we got the right picture on the screen. His hair was white, his posture military straight. He bounced up the steps and smiled warmly. He looked dignified, solid, confident, like a chief executive. Then he opened his mouth, and this is the first thing he said. I want to talk to you about worker safety, he said. Every year, numerous Alcoa workers are injured so badly they miss a day of work. Our safety record is better than the general American workforce, especially considering our employees work with metals that are 1,500 degrees and machines that can rip off a man's arm. But that's not good enough. I intend to make Alcoa the safest company in America. I intend to go for zero injuries. The audience was confused. The meetings of this type usually followed a predictable script. A new CEO would start with an introduction, make faux self-deprecating jokes about how they'd slept through Harvard Business School or something, then promise to boost profits and lower costs. Next would come an exorcisation of taxes, business regulations, and sometimes with the fervor that suggested firsthand experience in divorce court lawyers. Finally, the speech would end with the blizzard of buzzwords, synergy, right-sizing, and co-opetition, at which point everyone would return to their offices reassured that capitalism was safe for another day. O'Neill hadn't said anything about profits. He didn't mention taxes. There was no talk of using alignment to achieve win-win synergistic market advantages. For all anyone in the audience knew, given his talk about worker safety, O'Neill might be pro-regulation, or worse, he might be a Democrat. It was a terrifying prospect. Now, before I go any further, O'Neill said, I want to point out the safety exits in this room. He gestured to the rear of the ballroom. There's a couple of doors in the back, and in the unlikely event of a fire or other emergency, you should calmly walk out, go down the stairs to the lobby, and leave the building. Complete silence in the room. The only noise was the hum of traffic through the windows. Safety? Fire exits? Was this a joke? One investor in the audience knew that O'Neill had been in Washington, D.C. during the 60s and thought this guy must have done a lot of drugs. Eventually, someone raised their hand and asked about inventories in the aerospace division. Another asked about the company's capital ratios. I'm not certain you heard me, O'Neill said. If you want to understand how Alcoa is doing, you need to look at our workplace safety figures. If we bring our injury rate down, it won't be because of cheerleading or the nonsense you hear from other CEOs. It will be because individuals in this company have agreed to become part of something important. They've devoted themselves to creating habits of excellence. Safety will be an indicator that we're making progress in changing our habits across the entire institution. That's how we should be judged. The investors, it says, in the room almost stampeded out of the doors when the presentation ended. One jogged into the lobby, found a payphone, and called his 20 largest clients. I told them, the board put a crazy hippie in charge and is going to kill the company. I ordered them to sell their stock immediately before everyone else in the room started calling their clients and telling them the same things. And then the advisor says, this was literally the worst piece of advice I gave in my entire career. Well, here's what happened. Within a year of O'Neill's speech, Alcoa's profits would hit record highs. By the time he retired in 2000, which was how long was that? 13 years, from 1987 to 2000. The company's annual net income was 5 times larger than before he arrived. Its market capitalization had risen by $27 billion. if you had invested $1 million in Alcoa the day O'Neill was hired, you would have earned another $1 million in dividends, while the stock value would have been 5 times higher. So all in all, he did a good job. What's more, all that growth occurred while Alcoa became one of the safest companies in the world. Before O'Neill's arrival, almost every Alcoa plant had at least one accident per week. Once his safety plan was implemented, some facilities would go years without a single employee losing a workday due to an accident. The company's worker injury rate fell to 1/20th the U.S. average. So how did O'Neill make one of the largest, stodgiest, most potentially dangerous companies into a profit machine and a bastion of safety? And here's the punchline that goes with our webinar today. By attacking one habit and then watching the changes ripple through the organization. Now, take note of this. By attacking one habit and then watching the changes ripple through the organization. Said O'Neill, I knew I had to transform Alcoa, but you can't order people to change. That's not how the brain works. So I decided I was going to start by focusing on one thing. If I could start disrupting the habits around one thing, it would spread throughout the entire company. O'Neill believed that some habits have the power to start a chain reaction, changing other habits as they move through an organization. Some habits, in other words, matter more than others in remaking businesses and lives. These are what are called keystone habits. Now, I'll go ahead and put this on the screen. This is from, oh, well, here's O'Neill. He's thinking safety, okay? That's all the guy cares about. So let's go to the next slide here. Keystone habits. And this is coming from page 100 and 101 of the book, The Power of Habit, okay? So you can read this yourself. And I would recommend you get this and look at this because this is interesting stuff. O'Neill believed that some habits have the power to start a chain reaction. These are keystone habits. They can influence how people work, eat, play, live, spend, and communicate. Keystone habits start a process that over time transforms everything. Keystone habits say that success doesn't depend on getting every single thing right, but instead relies on identifying a few key priorities and fashioning them into powerful levers. Okay? So let's think about this for a minute. Keystone habits. Now, this is clearly not new territory that's being covered, but obviously what we're going to do is look at you personally and you, your business, and try to identify and think about what kind of keystone habits could be included. Now, before we get to that part of this webinar, and that part is coming, I want to continue with the story of Paul O'Neill because I want you to see how he took this concept and made it not just talking points, not just something to get people's attention, but how he actually lived it and how it actually made the difference. Okay? So let's skip forward in the story a few pages. It says, at the time when he took over, Alcoa was struggling. Critics said the company's workers weren't nimble enough and the quality of its products were poor. But at the top of O'Neill's list, he didn't write quality, he didn't write efficiency as his biggest priority. At a company as big and old as Alcoa, you can't flip a switch and expect everyone to work harder or produce more. The previous CEO, now listen to this part, okay? This just gives us a glimpse into the dynamics of the company. The previous CEO had tried to mandate improvements, and 15,000 employees had gone on strike. It got so bad, they would bring dummies to the parking lots, dress them like managers, and burn them in effigy. Alcoa was not a happy family, one person told the author. It was more like the Manson family, but with molten metal. O'Neill figured his top priority, if he took the job, would have to be something that everybody, unions and executives, could agree was important. He needed a focus that would bring people together and would give him leverage to change how people worked and communicated. I went to the basics, he said. Everyone deserves to leave work as safely as they arrived. You shouldn't be scared that feeding your family is going to kill you. That's what I decided to focus on, changing everyone's safety habits. At the top of O'Neill's list, he wrote down safety and set out an audacious goal, 0 injuries. Not 0 factory injuries, 0 injuries, period. This would be his commitment no matter how much it cost. He decided to take the job. Okay? Now, skip forward. O'Neill says, I'm really glad to be here, he told a room full of workers at a smelting plant in Tennessee a few months after he was hired. Not everything had gone smoothly. Wall Street was still panicked. The unions were concerned. Some of Alcoa's vice presidents were miffed about being passed over for the top job, and O'Neill just kept talking about worker safety. I'm happy to negotiate with you about, now, the part I'm about to read, I want you to really pay serious attention to, and if you're on this webinar thinking, well, why would a guy get on a webinar and read a book that I could just as easily go get and read myself? The answer is, number one, you probably don't have the book and haven't read it, so I'm going to bring something out to you that's important. And number two, I'm going to give you a little commentary, and we're going to do some exercises. This is good stuff. Listen to this. I want you to listen to the commitment. I'm happy to negotiate with you about anything, O'Neill said. He was on a tour of Alcoa's American plants, after which he was going to visit the company's facilities in 31 other countries. Who? Him, personally. There's one thing I'm never going to negotiate with you, and that's safety. I don't ever want you to say that we haven't taken every step to make sure that people don't get hurt. I want you to argue. If you want to argue with me about that, you are going to lose. The brilliance of this approach was that, of course, nobody wanted to argue with O'Neill about worker safety. Unions had been fighting for safety rules for years. Managers didn't want to argue about it because injuries meant lost productivity and low morale. What most people didn't realize, though, was O'Neill's plan for getting zero injuries actually entailed the most radical realignment in Alcoa's history. The key to protecting Alcoa's employees, O'Neill believed, was understanding why injuries happened. And if you wanted to understand why injuries happened, you had to understand how the manufacturing process was going wrong. To understand how things were going wrong, you had to bring in people who could educate workers about quality control and the most efficient processes so that it would be easier to do everything right, since correct work is also safer work. So we tackled the quality problem, the morale problem, the efficiency problems by tackling this, what turns out to be an umbrella or keystone type of a habit. In other words, to protect workers, Alcoa needed to become the best, most streamlined aluminum company on earth. His safety plan was modeled on what the author calls the habit loop. There was a simple cue, which was an employee injury. He instituted an automatic routine. Anytime someone was injured, the unit president had to report to O'Neill within 24 hours and present a plan for making sure the injury never happened again. And then there was a reward. The only people who got promoted were those who embraced the system. So we won't go into a lot of detail on what is called the habit loop, but there's a cue, a routine, and a reward. And in the book, he talks on simple levels. You know, what's the cue that made you want to eat a chocolate chip cookie? What was the routine? What was the reward? And then he talks about breaking that habit loop and replacing it. We're not going to get into that detail, but let's just suffice it to say that anytime that there was an employee injury, the unit president had to report to O'Neill within 24 hours. So in other words, any injury anywhere in the entire system had to be personally reported by the unit president to O'Neill. So he was going to find out about every single injury in the entire company. Okay? So interestingly enough, as safety patterns shifted, other aspects of the company started changing with startling speed also. Rules that unions had spent decades opposing, such as measuring the productivity of individual workers, were suddenly embraced because measurements helped everyone figure out when the manufacturing process was getting out of whack and posed a safety risk. Policies that managers had resisted, such as giving workers autonomy to shut down production lines when the pace became overwhelming, were now welcomed because that was the best way to stop injuries before they occurred. The company shifted so much that some employees found safety habits shifting into other parts of their lives. And then he tells a couple stories about employees that chastise non-employees in other situations outside of work for not being safe. In other words, illustrating the point that these became deeply ingrained habits for them. He never promised that his focus on worker safety would increase Alcoa's profits. However, as his new routines moved through the organization, costs came down, quality went up, productivity skyrocketed. If molten metal was injuring workers when it splashed, the pouring system was redesigned, which led to fewer injuries. It also saved money because Alcoa lost less raw materials and spills. If machines kept breaking down, it was replaced, which meant there was less risk for broken gear snagging employees' arms. It also meant higher quality products because Alcoa discovered equipment malfunctions were the chief cause of subpar aluminum. So here's what they found. They go into a discussion here about how these kinds of keystone habits affect other parts of people's lives. And I'll just give you this briefly. You probably know this, but it says when people start habitually exercising as infrequently as once a week, they start changing other unrelated patterns. Typically, people who exercise start eating better, become more productive at work, they smoke less, they show more patience with colleagues and family, they use their credit cards less frequently, and they feel less stressed. It's not completely clear why, but for many people, exercise is a keystone habit that triggers widespread change. Exercise spills over, according to James Prochaska, a University of Rhode Island researcher. There's something about it that makes us other good habits easier. Now, this is what we call a rising tide raises all ships, is a cute way to say that. A rising tide raises all ships. And they go into other stories here about other types of keystone habits. Making the bed causes people to have a more productive day. How eating family meals together makes grades go better for children. Here's what it says. If you focus on changing or cultivating keystone habits, you can cause widespread shifts. However, identifying keystone habits is tricky. To find them, you have to know where to look. Detecting keystone habits means searching certain characteristics. Keystone habits offer what is known as small wins. They help other habits to flourish by creating new structures, and they establish cultures where change becomes contagious. Okay? Then he gets into a story about Michael Phelps, the swimmer, that I'm not going to share with you. And he talks about how Michael Phelps created keystone habits to allow him to produce in the pool when other people maybe wouldn't, especially given the fact that Michael Phelps, from a physical standpoint, is certainly a great physical specimen as it relates to swimming, but then he points out so are all of the other world-class competitors. So there's some mental edges that come from some habits. And he shares a story about in the Beijing Olympics when he dove into the pool for one of his most important races, and his goggles got out of line, and he ended up swimming the entire race with no vision because his goggles were full of water, but he was able to win the gold medal still because he kicked in habits that he had created through his training. So I won't share that specific story with you, but suffice it to say, that is pretty interesting. Now, let's get back to Paul O'Neill. And I want you to continue with me in this story. We want to talk about his commitment and how he followed through with this. 6 months after he became CEO, he got a telephone call in the middle of the night. A plant manager in Arizona was on the line, panicked, talking about how an extrusion press had stopped operating, and one of the workers, a young man who had joined the company a few weeks earlier, eager for the job because it offered health care for his pregnant wife, had tried a repair. He had jumped over a yellow safety wall surrounding the press and walked across the pit. There was a piece of aluminum jammed in a huge hinge on a swinging 6-foot arm. The young man pulled the aluminum scrap, removed it. The machine was fixed. Behind him, the arm restarted its arc, swinging towards his head. When it hit, the arm crushed his skull and killed him instantly. 14 hours later, O'Neill ordered all the plant's executives, as well as Alcoa's top officers in Pittsburgh, into an emergency meeting. For much of the day, they painstakingly recreated the accident with diagrams, and by watching videotapes again and again, they identified dozens of errors that had contributed to the death, including 2 managers who had seen the man jump over the barrier but failed to stop him, a training program that hadn't emphasized to the man that he wouldn't be blamed for a breakdown, lack of instructions that he should find a manager before attempting a repair, and absence of sensors to automatically shut down the machine when somebody stepped into the pit. "We killed this man," a grim-faced O'Neill told the group. "It's my failure of leadership. I caused his death. And it's the failure of all of you in the chain of command." The executives were taken aback. Sure, a tragic accident had occurred, but tragic accidents were a part of life at Alcoa. It was a huge company with employees who handled red-hot metal and dangerous machines. Paul had come in as an outsider, and there was a lot of skepticism when he talked about safety, said Bill O'Rourke, a top executive. "We figured it would last a few weeks, and then we would start focusing on something else. But that meeting really shook everyone up. He was serious about this stuff, serious enough that he would stay up nights worrying about some employee he'd never met. That's when things really started to change. Within a week of that meeting, all the safety railings at Alcoa's plants were repainted bright yellow, and new policies were written up. Managers told employees not to be afraid to suggest proactive maintenance, and rules were clarified so that no one would attempt unsafe repairs. The newfound vigilance resulted in a short-term noticeable decline in injuries. Alcoa experienced a small win. Then O'Neill pounced. I want to congratulate everyone for bringing down the number of accidents in just 2 weeks, even if just for 2 weeks. He wrote a memo that made its way through the entire company. We shouldn't celebrate because we followed the rules or brought down a number. We should celebrate because we're saving lives. Workers made copies of the note and taped it to their lockers. Someone painted a mural on one of the walls of a smelting plant with a quote from the memo underneath it. Just as Michael Phelps' routines had nothing to do with swimming and everything to do with his success, per the Michael Phelps story that I didn't tell you, O'Neill's efforts began to snowball into changes that were unrelated to safety but transformational nevertheless. I said to the hourly workers, if management doesn't follow up on safety issues, then call me at home. Here's my phone number. And guess what? Workers started calling. They talked about safety, but they also talked about other ideas. And then it talks about how when this was opened up, this pipeline of communication directly to the top, then they started giving other suggestions on other parts of the company that weren't related to safety, but were related to productivity and some other areas that began to improve. Something similar happened, let's see. Now, this is talking about some other, how other things related to safety started to help out things that were not related to safety. It says, O'Neill took an unusual step. Remember, this was the 80s. Took the unusual step of ordering Alcoa's offices around the world to link up on an electronic network. In the 1980s, large international networks weren't usually connected to people's desktop computers. O'Neill justified his order by arguing that it was essential to create real-time safety data systems so that managers could use to share suggestions. As a result, Alcoa developed one of the first genuinely worldwide corporate email systems. O'Neill logged on every morning and sent messages to make sure everyone else was logged on as well. At first, people used the network primarily to discuss, that's right, safety issues. Then, email habits became more ingrained and comfortable. They started posting information on all kinds of other topics, such as local market conditions, sales quotas, business problems. High-ranking executives were required to send reports every Friday, which anyone in the company could read. A manager in Brazil used the network to send a colleague in New York data on changes in the price of steel. The New York worker took that information and turned a quick profit for the company on Wall Street. Pretty soon, everyone was using the system to communicate about everything. I would send in my accident report, and I knew everyone else would read it, so I figured why not send pricing information or intelligence on other companies, one manager said. It was like we had discovered a secret weapon. The competition couldn't figure out how we were doing it. In other words, they created a technology advantage initially designed strictly for the subject of safety, which then became useful and worthwhile and a weapon for them in other areas. When the web blossomed, Alcoa was perfectly positioned to take advantage. The keystone habit of safety had created a platform that encouraged another practice, email, years ahead of its competitors. Now, we're going to finish this up with one more anecdote about Paul O'Neill, and then we'll shift gears into talking about your company. Okay, so all of this is sort of an antecedent to let's talk about you. And this is an interesting scenario. Let's see. So they had a meeting, a shareholder meeting in downtown Pittsburgh. I don't know how to say this word. Benedictine nun stood up during a question and answer session and accused O'Neill of being a liar. Sister Mary Margaret represented a local advocacy group concerned about wages and conditions inside an Alcoa plant in Mexico. She said that while O'Neill extolled Alcoa's safety measures, workers in Mexico were becoming sick because of dangerous fumes. That's not true, O'Neill told the room. On his laptop, he pulled up the safety records from the Mexican plant. See, he said, showing the room its high scores on safety, environmental compliance, and employee satisfaction surveys. The executive in charge of the facility was named Robert Barton. He was one of Alcoa's most senior managers. He had been with the company for decades and was responsible for some of their largest partnerships. The nun said that the audience shouldn't trust O'Neill, and then she sat down. After the meeting, O'Neill asked her to come to the office. The nun's religious order owned 50 shares of Alcoa stock, and for months they had been asking for a shareholder vote on a resolution to review the company's Mexican operations. O'Neill asked Sister Mary if she had been to any of the plants herself. She said no. To be safe, O'Neill asked the company's head of human resources and general counsel to fly to Mexico to see what was going on. So some 50 share none has a strong contention that there's a problem, even though all the data says there's not. Still, he sends who? Head of human resources and general counsel. These are big-time people flying to Mexico to look at a plant. When the executives arrived, they poked through the plant's records, found reports of an incident that had never been sent to headquarters. A few months earlier, there had been a buildup of fumes within a building. Oh, that's exactly what the nun had said. It was a relatively minor event. The plant's executive, Barton, had installed ventilators to remove the gases. The people who had become ill fully recovered within 1 or 2 days. But, what's the key here? Barton had never reported the illness. When the executives returned to Pittsburgh and presented their findings, O'Neill had a question. Did Bob Barton know that people had gotten sick? We didn't meet with them, the executive said, but yeah, it's pretty clear that he knew. 2 days later, Barton was, fired. Now, let's review who Barton was. One of Alcoa's most senior managers, had been with the company for decades and was responsible for some of their largest partnerships. Fired for not reporting a minor incident that had resulted in a few minor worker injuries. Within the exit shocked outsiders. Barton had been mentioned in articles as one of the company's most valuable executives. His departure was a blow to important joint ventures. Within Alcoa, however, nobody was surprised. It was seen as an inevitable extension of the culture, keyword culture, that O'Neill had built. Barton fired himself, one of his colleagues told me. There wasn't even a choice. This is the final way that Keystone Habits encourage widespread change, by creating cultures where new values become ingrained. Keystone Habits make tough choices, such as firing a top executive, easy because when the person violates the culture, it's clear they have to go. Sometimes these cultures manifest themselves in special vocabularies, which becomes a habit. Okay, we can skip that. We're about done here. We're at the very last sentence. It might have been hard for another company to fire someone who had been there so long, O'Neill said. It wasn't hard for me. It was clear what our values dictated. He got fired because he didn't report the incident, and no one else in the company had an opportunity to learn from it. Not sharing an opportunity to learn is a cardinal sin. Okay, we're done with the book here for this part of the webinar. But I want you to think about this keystone habit of safety. I love it. Let's take a look at how this can affect you. So let's talk about implementing this in terms of marketing. And then we're going to talk about it outside of marketing. We're going to talk about how to use it to fix problems. So in marketing, for our purposes, we'll equate keystone habits to identity. If you were to ask Alcoa, what is your identity? We are the safest company in the world. Now, what does that mean? It's going to be executed and implemented in many, many different ways. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about identity, and keystone habits is the same thing. So let's talk about a company that has a no sales pressure identity. Now, I'm not saying this is your identity, but let's just take a look at it. What kinds of things could you do if this was your company and your keystone habit, your identity was sales pressure? Well, first of all, you would put training and emphasis on no pressure. This is something that you would ingrain into your employees from top to bottom. How about this? Restructuring your pay to discourage pressure sales. Anything you do to encourage, wittingly or unwittingly, something that goes against your culture, keystone habit, identity, however you want to say it, is something that would cause an issue. Now, the reason I told you the entire story of Paul O'Neill, well, it probably wasn't the entire story, a lengthy, in detail story about Paul O'Neill, is because I wanted you to see the examples where he stood behind it and actually put it into action and didn't just give it lip service, okay? And that's what I'm really trying to impart to you is lip service is one thing, follow through is something else. How about putting together a standards guide that is sent out to customers with a no-pressure sales document informing customers on the front end that you're a company that does not engage in sales pressure? What about a message that is integrated into other marketing pieces? And this is really what we're talking about in identity, right? Taking your identity and distributing it throughout your entire marketing program. What about this? Ride-along sales companions or secret videotaping. In other words, we're going to send somebody with you on sales appointments, not every sales appointment, but we're going to see how you're doing. Or we'll secretly videotape. I work with a company right now. It's a very large HVAC company that does secret videotapings of their salespeople and of their installation technicians to make sure that they're doing it right. And it's written into their contract. It's not any kind of shady thing that catches people off guard. All of the workers and salespeople know that this is possible and can be done. They work with prospective customers and customers ahead of time to schedule setting up the video cameras and so forth. But they're serious about making sure things are done right. And I'm just saying, if you are serious about no sales pressure, if you want that to be our identity, why not actually make it infiltrate every pore, every atom, every fiber and sinew of the company? That's what I'm trying to say. How about customer reviews? Make sure customers review. The most important grade is sales pressure, so that your salespeople know they're going to maybe be videotaped. They might be looked at. They're going to have customers reviewing. Make sure they understand what's important. How about public or special accolades and rewards for people that follow through? People that get high results on their customer reviews or on their videotapings, whatever. We hand out awards. Maybe we make a name for that award that has to do with, in this case, sales pressure. And what about public firings for offenders? No different than Barton in the Paul O'Neill story. Regardless of his seniority or tenure, when he broke the rules, baby, he was gone. Now, I don't mean public like we put it on the news. I mean public in that we make it known to all of the other workers so that they see that there's rewards for people who do well, and there's disincentives for those who don't do well. It's a carrot and it's a stick, okay, so to speak. So let's talk about another example. What about obsessive about quality? What if your company is obsessive about quality? Well, how about making sure that every single job includes at least, whoops, excuse me, that's a typo, 1 or 2 instances. You know what? Okay, sorry about that. I was behind on my slideshow. I apologize for that. How about making sure that every single job includes at least 1 or 2 instances that the customer is aware of? Build, tear out, and redo into your pricing and encourage the practice. In other words, if you're going to go to the marketplace and tell people that we're obsessive about quality, I'm talking about maybe a kitchen remodel or something like that here, why not make it something that you build into your systems to find things that are not done properly, not massively improperly, but find things that you can do that let the customer see that you actually obsess over quality. Maybe you put handles on the cabinets, the cabinet pulls, and then you say, you know what, I hate these. I'm going to go look for different ones, and you take them off and you put new ones on. Whatever, I don't know. Figure it out. How about a whatever it takes, no matter the profit or loss manifesto signed by the crew leader, and then, of course, what? Shown to the customer. Post stories, case studies, and testimonials about perfection on the website. Public awards and recognitions for being OCD. Public firings, okay? This is the same thing that we talked about before. We saw this in the Alcoa story. I'm recommending that you might want to integrate something like that into your company. What about the next example, community-friendly bank? If you listen to the 5 Biggest Marketing Mistakes CD that I put out, then you'll be familiar with this community-friendly bank example. It's under innovation section. But let's just go quickly. If you wanted to have a community-friendly bank, first of all, build a room or an area specifically designed for community events and nothing else, so that people know we hold community events in here, art shows, poetry readings, CPR trainings, whatever those things might be. Various kinds of trainings on different topics. A sewing club can meet there. Maybe book clubs are welcome to come in and meet there. They can schedule the room for certain times. Make it an event center, a community center. Why not? Well, it's a bank. That's not what banks do. Well, it is if they want to be truly the community-friendly bank. Create 10 freebies that can be offered in the bank. And now you're starting to see where the innovation and the keystone habit and the identity all start to overflow one with another. In fact, I think that if you wanted to look and cross-pollinate this idea with the innovation formulas, it would be the innovation formula called what? Captain Obvious, right? Go look that up and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay? Next, make ability to remember faces and names the first line on the job qualifications list. Okay, we don't care how much experience you have. We care, can you remember face and names? Oh, I'm not good with names and faces. Well, then you can't work here, period. Next, make being friendly the second one. Send mailers or emails to customers letting them know what community things you've got going on each week. Okay, reward employees first and foremost on the promise. What promise? The promise of being a community-friendly bank. This is what we're trying to instill, is taking the promise, the brand promise, the Keystone habit, the identity, and making sure that it's implemented, integrated, and everybody's on the same page. If everybody's on the same page, then that identity starts to be very strong. It starts to be memorable in your customers. It starts to lead to more referrals and repeat business because you become a memorable company, not just a company, okay? Now let's talk about fixing problems. Identify areas in your company that are weak and determine what Keystone habits can be implemented to fix them. Not necessarily things that are visible to your customers, but they might be visible if something goes wrong. So let's take some MYM examples, and this is kind of, you know, the Wizard of Oz, and let's pull the curtain back, and, you know, it's kind of embarrassing because here's some problems that we've had and things that we're doing to fix them. Hey, we're not a perfect company, but we're trying, and we can utilize this same system of habits, Keystone habits, to fix things. So one of the problems that we have is we're a virtual company. We do not have a centralized office. We got rid of that just about 2 years ago now, and we sent all the employees home. We used to have an office where we all came and worked together every day, and for various reasons that we don't need to discuss right now, we got rid of that and sent everybody home. Well, one of the problems when you send everybody home is you've got some issues where it's hard to find out what exactly is going on with everybody. And this was a problem for me. I've got employees that are out there working and getting things done, but problems pop up and things start happening, and I start hearing about stuff, but I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I've asked people to report, so we put in a reporting protocol. A reporting protocol says, here's what you need to report every single day via email on these specific items. And if you do this, fantastic. And if you don't do this, then that's going to be a problem. So insisting on it and making sure that the offenses are dealt with and followed through with, and making sure that it becomes a habit. And sure enough, we've been doing this now. We were doing it informally for months, even years, and having very limited success and inconsistent reporting. And now that we've formalized it, it's become indeed a habit, and we've got 100% compliance. It happens every day, all the time, so we know exactly what's going on. It's fantastic. Here's a concept for you. This is a cross-pollination of an idea that comes out of a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, which you might want to pick up. Great book. And I don't know what he calls it in there. He's got some other name for it. I haven't picked up that book in a couple of months, so I can't remember what he calls it. But I call it the most important metric. What is the thing that you measure yourself by? And he gives the example in the book of Walgreens, and they measure their success by the average dollar amount per ticket. So every time somebody walks in, how much do they spend? And other companies have different types of metrics. Well, one of the metrics that we are implementing in our company, and this is very current in its response to problems of not getting things turned around for customers fast enough, so we're implementing a speed metric. We've completely retooled our processes and protocols, how we handle our customers, so that things are more streamlined, put stronger project managers in charge of dealing frontline with customers, and have a definitive goal on how fast we turn things around. And these are things that have to be communicated and talked about. But the Keystone habit in this, for one, reporting. For speed, we've got a Keystone habit, which is the most important metric. So we start to measure how fast does it take us to turn things around, and that's something that everybody can look at, that particular metric. Okay? Restructuring pay to reward Keystone habits. And I won't go into a lot of detail about that other than to say the things that get rewarded tend to get done, and if people feel like they're being rewarded for following the procedures, then they will tend to get things done. Okay? Let's talk about another example, an HVAC company. Here's the problem. They were having a lot of rear-end accidents in their company. In other words, their technicians out driving around trying to get stuff done were running into people. And they had many, many of these crashes, something like 13 or 14 in a 2-month period of time. It was just ridiculous. So, Keystone habit. Here was what they put in place. If you have a rear-end accident, regardless of fault, you are fired. That's it. That's all you need to know. Now, you don't just put a mandate out there and not put things in place to empower people to follow through and to succeed. So here's what they did. First of all, driver training specific to rear ending problem, making sure everybody knew what kind of situations, how to avoid certain kinds of accidents. They installed cameras on all the vehicles to monitor accidents. They put a camera in that in the event of an impact it was continually videoing, but it would only hold in memory the last something like 30 or 60 seconds of before and after impact. So in other words, they had cameras that were facing forward so they could see what was happening outside of the car, and facing to the driver so they could see what the driver was doing. And if there was an accident, they could see both directions for a minute before and a minute after the accident to see what was going on. Oh, I'm going to be watched. I better get off my cell phone and quit texting because that's leading me to rear end somebody. They put governors on the vehicles that prevent speeding. You can't go over a certain speed. They actually have technology that allows you to know what the speed limit is on a given street through GPS technology and adjust the amount of speed that vehicle is allowed to go. Did you know that technology exists? It does, and it prevents rear-end accidents. High-profile firing of the first offender, okay, rewards for drivers for success after X number of days of no accidents, much like the Paul O'Neill story, okay? So let's just take and shift this to one more section here, and let's talk about personal habits, keystone habits, okay? So this is a concept that we've talked about before. It's called identifying where you're the mostest behindest, and then create a keystone habit that will make everything else fall into place. So I'll give you an example. At MYM Recording, I was having this discussion with my oldest son when he was, gosh, it was 2003, so he would have been about 10 at the time, maybe 9 or 10, somewhere in that range. And we were talking about where are you the mostest behindest, and he asked me, where are you the mostest behindest? And I was the mostest behindest in writing the book, Monopolize Your Marketplace. And I'd been putting it off, and other things were a priority, and I hadn't been getting it done. And it was something that we needed in our business to give us a certain level of credibility and to have a tool that people could read and understand our philosophy better. And I put a habit in place, which was I went to the recording studio. I booked it with my recording guy. I will be there every Monday at 2 o'clock for a 90-minute session. I want you to bill me every Monday whether or not I show up. And I will commit to you until this project is recorded, I will show up. Well, the problem with that was I didn't actually have a book written to be able to show up to record. So it forced me to create the book in outline form the way I wanted it and to start to write it and edit it and be thorough with it every single week. And then every Monday, sure enough, I would show up and I would record. And it took a project that had been on delay for years and allowed me to finish it within a matter of a few months of recording every Monday. It was a keystone habit, okay? What about weight loss? I'm not saying you need to lose weight, but what would be the keystone habits? Maybe it would be certain foods that you cut out or exercising like we mentioned earlier. I don't want to talk about that in detail, but just think about it. What kind of keystone habits? What about your spirituality? Are you lacking there? Let me give you some interesting examples. In our church, I'm a member of the LDS Church, or what you might know as the Mormon Church, same as Mitt Romney, for what that's worth. And we've got certain things that the church, I think, definitively thought through and says we're going to make these things into keystone habits. The first one listed on here is called FHE, stands for Family Home Evening. And it's something that the church encourages us to do every Monday night, to get your family together and spend about 20 to 60 minutes together having a lesson on some kind of topic that relates to spirituality or scriptures or whatnot, and to make it a weekly event. Well, why would they do something like that? Because they want us to get in the habit of taking time, not on just Sunday when it's a little bit easier to gather the family, but on a weeknight to gather the family and to encourage us to not just get together and go to the movies, not just get together and watch TV, not just get together and play a game, and there's nothing wrong with those activities, but also to engage in family, spiritual education, learning, studying. Why? Because those are habits that even, and I'm telling you, I do this with my kids, and it's hard. I've got all kinds of kids at all different ages with all different levels of things that they've got going on in their lives, and it's hard to pull it all together, but it creates a really great habit. We also have what's called a 3-hour block. Our church goes for 3 hours on Sundays, and a lot of times outsiders look at that and say, geez, a 3-hour block of church, that's insane. Who would go to church that long? Well, if you value, and in our church we very highly value the tenet of keeping the Sabbath day holy. This is one way to get you to really focus in on that concept of keeping the Sabbath day holy. We're going to get you to church for 3 hours. And there's different kinds of activities and things that are going on within the 3 hours. It's not just sitting there for 3 consecutive hours listening to some guy preach. But it is an interesting way to create that habit. The other one on here, the third one, is one that's very interesting. And those of you who are Christians, and not everybody's a Christian, whatever, but if you are, this is something that you might be a little bit envious of if you hear about this. In our church, we've got a program where every morning at either 5:30 or 6:30, there's 2 classes that you can choose from, depending on your schedule with school. The high school kids go to a early morning, what we call seminary class, which is essentially, it's a scripture study class. And there's a teacher who prepares a lesson, and it happens every single day that they've got school. So if they get off for a holiday, whatever, then they don't have seminary that day. But these kids go in every single school day during high school. I've got a daughter who's in marching band. She marches until about 5:30 or 6 o'clock. She gets home. She does her homework. She gets to bed usually at about 10:30 or 11. She's a good student. It's hard for her to be a good student because she's very artistic. She's got to work really hard at things like math and science, but she does it. And then she's got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready so she can be over at seminary at 6:30, even though school doesn't start until 8 o'clock. This is a huge sacrifice, but here's what happens. It creates a keystone habit of what? Putting you in a spiritual frame of mind, reminding you of what your values are, helping you to learn and study and to understand, but putting you into this habit. They don't require, this is not required in our church for college kids or for junior high kids or for adults. The program does not exist except for high school kids. And it's putting into them this habit of spirituality. And then the fourth thing on there is at age 19, we send our young men to go serve as missionaries, and that creates its own set of habits. I won't spend time talking about that, though. What about personal spirituality? Could you have a habit of saying your prayers in the morning or reading your scriptures? And this isn't about spirituality. I mean, we could have the same discussion about your finances, about your relationship with your wife. If you've got a rocky relationship with your wife, what kind of keystone habit could you put in place to fix that? Could you set an alarm on your phone so that every day you remind yourself to go onto Google or to go onto Pinterest or to go on somewhere on the internet and find something and send it to your wife to remind her that I'm thinking about you, that I like you, that my relationship with you is important. I'll give you an example of this. I don't set reminders because the habit with me is fairly well set, but I'll give you a little hint here, and you might think this is kind of crazy, and you might think, wow, I can't believe that this guy, Rich, and he's supposed to be teaching us marketing, is such a sappy individual, but I value the relationship with my wife. So yesterday at 9 o'clock in the morning, I sent her a text that says, I love you a million. The day before, I sent her one that says, you look beautiful today. Just little things I find on the internet, pictures that I send to her, not even just text. I sent her one of a funny picture a couple days before that. Let's see, what came before that? Well, I don't know. You get the idea. Oh, okay. Yeah, here's one. She was having a hard time over some issues last week, so I sent her a bunch of little messages, that tried to cheer her up. But these are just little things you can do. This doesn't have to be a big deal. If your keystone habit is I send a text message every day with something funny or cute or sappy, then maybe that makes you think a little bit harder about maybe helping out with the dishes or just saying a kind word or just being nice. It's called keystone habits. What I'm encouraging you to do is think through this. It's not about your spirituality. It's not about your weight loss. It's not about your business. It's not about your finances. It's not about your relationships. It's about wherever you feel like you need to improve. Wherever you're mostest behind this is where you should start and make these things happen. Okay? Homework, homework. We got a keystone habit in our house this year. We've had struggles with homework in the past, and our keystone habit this year works like this. When you get home from school, you can't do anything until you finish your homework, period. And you can't play Xbox unless you've got straight A's. Wow, guess how the homework improves. So anyway, I think you get the idea. That's all we've got time for today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. We're going to be back in a half hour with our Insiders Open Forum. We've got our Insider members that have submitted questions to talk about. So if you'll join me in a half hour, we'll get to that. And until then, spend some time after this call thinking about this concept of habits and how it can affect you and your business and maybe even your personal life. That's all I got for you right now. Thanks so much for attending and participating, and most of all for being a customer. Appreciate it. Talk to you later. See you. Bye now. Hello.